Well, hello, my soul friends. It is Victoria, and you might have noticed that I missed a couple of videos. I have been super consistent about having a new moon video, full moon video, and a transformational offering, a support of some kind to help us navigate these intensely transformational times. Well, as you know, we're all in it together, and I had my own intense time. And my talk today is going to be about grief. Um, I was a grief counselor for years for hospice, and I've had a lot of loss in my life. I don't like to say loss. I've had a lot of experiences with transitioning from a loved one in the physical world into the spiritual realm. And most recently, just this last week, my brother-in-law, my older sister's husband of 48 years, who was like a father figure to me, an older brother, the patriarch of our family. His kids referred to him as the backbone of the family. And he had a quick illness and a sudden death. And this all occurred over the last couple of weeks. And while I have a commitment to be here to stay connected and consistent, those of you who have experienced extreme challenges like this and who understand the journey of grief will understand why I couldn't do that video. And I can barely do this one, but I'm pulling it together because I want to honor my commitment here. And I also, every time you experience grief, and again, I know a lot of you out there know what I'm talking about. And remember, I always talk about collectively, we are in a grief experience because you can't have transformation without grief. Something ends, something changes, someone dies, life as you knew it changes. And then what comes along is grief. Grief is an ally to help us support us in adjusting to life, to being no longer as we knew it. The loved one we had counted on, had consistency with, had a phone call from every day is no longer in the world. Or the job we went to, we are no longer working at. Or the body we took for granted, maybe that works so well, we could go running and biking and everything, suddenly isn't working that way. Or suddenly there's some limitations or some changes, which creates the need for a grief journey. A grief journey. I always say that grief is our ally, not a bad thing. It comes alongside of us to say, I got you. And it takes our broken hearts and it helps us. I always think of this. I used to say to my clients, grief is like life as you know it. The vessel you're holding, like a ceramic vessel of your life as you know it, has shattered. And grief work is first being in the pain of the shattering and the heartbreak. And the heartbreak and the brokenness of your heart, you get to see all the brokenness of your life. Everything shows up. And when you have experienced an end of something, the end of a life, the end of a loved one who's so prominent in your life, physically, I believe that, I love the quote that death ends the life, not a relationship. We just have to get used to shifting from, oh, hey, my loved one's here, to let me see if I can feel them right now. And that's adjustment, and that's grief. So these scattered pieces and the broken heart, and also what happens that in our unconscious mind, the file of every single death or loss or ending or adjustment opens up. So grief is accumulative. It's not the current present death of the person that we're adjusting to. It's every other death, every other big significant shift. And I will say loss, although I do agree that, it's a loss. It's like we can't find them in our life, but we find them in spirit. We find them in our dreams. We find them in our memories, in our hearts. So they're not lost. They're just not as physically present. So I have to find another word besides loss. So just the adjustment, right? But to recognize that. So I want to speak to anybody who's experiencing grief, and maybe some of the people that I got to talk with at my brother-in-law's memorial service and my own family. This is for you and for me to remember when we're in a grief response or reaction. I want to make a distinction there. Grief reaction is like all of our wounded stuff comes up. We may, if we may be more angry, of course, you know, in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, which some people don't agree with. I think that they do apply. They're not linear though, and that's where people get it wrong. It's not like this, then that, then the other. It's a scramble. Some days you're angry, sometimes you're super sad, sometimes you're still in shock. And sometimes, you know, you have a taste of acceptance, which is what we move to, accepting no longer the way it was. They're no longer in our lives. And the acceptance is like healing balm that lets us see what's trying to be birthed anew, a new way of being. So this may be a little scattered, as I have said to a couple of friends and clients. I have grief brain right now. And for those of you who have grieved, you understand. It's like, I like to use the analogy that our brain and our unconscious mind and our capacity is like a computer. And when a death occurs or a significant life change occurs, all these files open up, connected, the references, the resources, or the associations to this current adjustment or loss or death or change. And so it's like all these open files in your computer brain. And so there's like drag on us. There's like, there's a heaviness, there's a slowness. We're not quite on top of things. Like I had a misstep with a possible client of scheduling. I tried to schedule this person in the midst. I mean, I think it was the day that my brother-in-law died. And I was like, oh, I got to get to my clients. And yet I probably had 10% of my capacity because 90% of my heart, my mind, my being was with my brother-in-law and with my family who were grieving. And yet I, you know, that Capricorn rising, like, got to do my work. And so I misscheduled somebody. And I had to offer myself grace. Oh, yes, I'm grieving. People do not understand grief. And one of the things that I used to teach my clients as a grief counselor was we have to educate people about what grief is like for us, because our grief journey is as unique as our relationship with the person was. And then there's an education to people who maybe have never experienced a significant loss. So they don't know what it's like, or they're so afraid of having a significant loss, they can't touch in to where you are. I was, right after my brother-in-law died, I was with a group of people, and I could tell my grief wasn't completely welcomed, and it would be uncomfortable for people to talk about. And I understood that. I know that that's real. And yet one person gave me this very deep hug. And in my mind, I said, she understands grief. She knows this journey. And it turned out, we talked later, and yes, she had a significant loss recently. And she understood it. So in some ways, you can't understand until you go through it or grow through it. So I'm wanting to educate those who have not experienced a significant loss. And for those of you who are in a grief journey, I want to go through a few things. Grief is a full body experience. It's a whole energy, body, mind, system experience. So you may experience heaviness in your body. You may literally feel, I was asking my nieces, where do you feel your grief? They said in their heart, in their stomach. It's a visceral experience. It's a somatic experience. If you deny your grief, if you're not allowing yourself to feel or express or emote or cry, your body is still holding it. Remember, emotion is energy in motion. If you have emotion, you feel it, you want to express it, or you're feeling it and you're about to burst open, but you push it down, or you think, oh, they can't handle it. Or I will say this, I love my brother-in-law with all my heart. He was such a peaceful warrior. and he wanted everyone to just be good and happy and enjoy life. And so he did say to his daughters, before he died, stay strong. And I was just like, oh, Richard, I love you, but don't tell them to stay strong. Let them feel the significant loss of you no longer in the world. It's okay. It's another one of my favorite quotes is that grief is the price we pay for the love we shared. So I'm like, don't they're not going to be strong because they loved you so much that they're willing to pay the debt of their grief and tears and sorrow. And me too, So please, 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 let's break this myth of you only have so much time to grieve and you should do it in a certain way and you should button it up and not talk about it. No. And if people can't talk about your grief with you, find people who can. Reach for support. You need to process this. You need to share your stories, not just the joyful stories, but the painful ones. And this is another thing I say about grief. Grief and death and grief is the last chapter of someone's life that we join them in. And it's the hardest chapter. But there's all these other chapters that hold the memories and the joy. And so we need to be in the last chapter, feel our feelings, cry our tears, tell our stories, take care of ourselves. Self-care is essential for healing through grief. And then when you heal, there's no time on a calendar. Oh, it's this date, I'm going to be healed. No. Grief, and again, the more significant relationship or experience, the longer the journey. And in fact, grief stays with us our entire life. Because a significant relationship stays with us our entire life. If you have a death of a father, a mother, a child, and my sister has experienced all three, and I have two. It's sometimes you don't know what you're grieving about or who you're grieving about. Is it my niece? Is it my dad? Is it my mom? Is it now my brother-in-law? Or is it all of it bunched together, right? And so some of the symptoms or the indicators of being in a grief reaction or response, exhaustion. Remember the drag on the computer, you're just exhausted. Not only are you trying to process this huge life event, you're dealing with all the regrets, the missteps, the guilt, the things you wish you had done that you didn't do, all of that heavy stuff that we carry when there is life has adjusted, especially with the death. So there's a heaviness, there's an exhaustion. Let yourself sleep. Let yourself reset, replenish, restore. There's an old Zen saying, and I used to tell my grief clients this all the time, and I'm taking this for myself right now. When you're hungry, eat. When you're tired, sleep. And when you're sad, cry. Let yourself cry. It's, tears are cleansing and healing. So what else? Brain fog. Can't remember what day it is, what day of the week it is. Where am I? What am I supposed to be doing? Brain fog. And I used to work with a lot of, older clients with through bereavement, and they would say, oh my gosh, do I have my early, dementia? And I'd say, no, this is grief. All of your being is trying to reset and restore. So you're going to forget things, and you're going to schedule people wrong, or you're going to just the day-to-day routine easy things are not easy anymore. Everything is weighted and heavy. This is grief. You may revert into some old patterns, because when a death occurs or life shifts and we don't know, the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown. I don't know what's ahead of me. So we revert back into old patterns, old coping mechanisms in order to navigate. So, this happens. Catch yourself and bring yourself to some awareness. Is this helping me? Is this coping mechanism helping me or helping others or not? And those of you who are on a faith-based path, This is where you surrender. You say, God, creator, universe, I surrender this pain. I surrender my fear, because fear and grief are very much the same. There is a quote like that. I don't remember who said that. And if you know it, put it in the comments. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, no one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear. And it does. Because when someone that was our consistent person is no longer in the world, we don't know what our world's going to be like. We don't know what tomorrow holds. And if the worst thing that could happen has happened, there's more fear. And so what is the antidote for fear? Faith. What is the remedy for a broken heart? Compassion. So, I offer this tool all the time. Place your hand over your heart. And for those of you who are grieving your broken heart, and offer yourself as much compassion and connect to your faith if you have it, and ground yourself. It's a very surreal experience for those of you who have had have experienced the death of a very close loved one. The shock, the distortion of reality is so real. And so grounding yourself, taking yourself outside, getting out in nature. I took my sister and I went to the beach the day after the memorial for just some respite. It happens to be her happy place. And I wanted to offer something for herself. And I also needed to reset. So feet in the water on the ocean, toes in the sand, feet in the grass, lean up against a tree, breathe in fresh air, get yourself. Nature is the best restorer, resetter. See, I wanted to cover some other symptoms, anger, disruption of sleep. Either you're sleeping too much or you can't sleep. Maybe intense dreams. Again, dreams are our psyche trying to restore, to regulate. Other grief responses. Sorry, I should have wrote them out. This is something I can just rattle off like that because it was my life's work for a while. But I am in my own grief experience right now. So some of them are not coming right now. I might put some in the details for you. So the first thing is to companion yourself through grief, because most people will not understand what you're going through. Most people will want to fix it, make it better, or not talk about it so that they can pretend everything's okay. So you are the keeper of your broken heart and the one who has the ability to heal your broken heart. Working with God, working with spirit, working with whatever faith you have. You're not alone. I mean, like I said, we're in a collective grief because life as we know it is changing. We're in a very intense transformational cycle, which means collectively, things that we could count on are no longer there. Things are shifting into things we don't know what's going to happen yet. So life as we know it is transforming. So we're all in a grief cycle. So may I say this, have greater compassion for yourself and others right now. Okay, we all need it. Let's see what else I wanted to say. There were a few things that were really, well, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll respond to them. I am going to be starting, I trained, I was a grief counselor, and then I trained in a few modalities for holding space for grief work out in nature. And I've been wanting to get back to doing this or offering it for the first time. And I really now with what's going on with me, remembering how important it is to grieve in a community. So I'm looking to do something either on Zoom or in person in September, but I need a little time here with myself to find my footing, my grounding, to find my center again. But I think that's all I had. If you have any questions about grief, or maybe write in the comments what you've noticed about your own grief, and what was challenging for you, and what you learned in witnessing yourself, companioning yourself through your grief experience. And this is important to put in the comments. What do you want people to understand about grief that they don't seem to get? And so one last thing, to be with people who are grieving, be honest. Say, I really don't know what to say. I don't know what the right words are, but know that I care and I feel you. Grief is one of those subjects we don't talk about, death and dying, and we don't embrace because it's something we all fear. But the more we lean in, the more we can heal ourselves and be of greater support to others. So I guess I'd say this: don't be afraid of your grief. Embrace it. Let it teach you. Let it lead you to higher grounds and to your healing and to a greater awareness and a restoration of what feels lost. You know, the person's no longer in the physical, but what will come out of this. I often say to people that are grieving the death of a loved one, you can honor them by acknowledging the qualities you most admired about them and integrating them in yourself, or asking, and I was teaching my nieces this, what would your dad say? What would your dad do? And then following that guidance and integrating that wisdom into your being. And then as we close out this last chapter, the hard chapter of the story we shared with our loved one, we get to live in the other chapters, those juicy, beautiful chapters with the joyful memories and all the wisdom our loved ones shared with us. That lives forever through our hearts, in our being, in our words, in our expression, and the way that we are with others. So remember this: grief is like feet in the fire of the most massive transformation you could go through. The fire of grief is so transformational. Let it burn away everything and anything that no longer serves you nor anyone else, and let yourself rise up, learning what you needed to learn, maybe, or remember, or be recalled back to you, emerging your authentic nature, and what your loved one taught you that you can integrate into your being, so that you rise up even more powerfully, with more compassion. And this is the great honoring for yourself, for your loved one, and for this journey of life we shared. All right, I hope this was helpful to someone. Let me know if it was. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Like, comment. I had to do my Zoom recording, so it's a little grainier, but it's on my heart to get this message out today. I'll be back next week with the new moon, and truly, I probably didn't need to do a video on the full moon in Aquarius, because I have a sense you felt it, because I sure did. Okay. All my love to you. Nurture that beautiful soul potential of yours. And remember, we're all in this together. You're not alone. All my love. Take good care.